The house felt alive with the quiet hum of anticipation. It was a sound I knew well, the low murmur of a dozen conversations, the clinking of glasses, the faint, sweet scent of blooming jasmine from the garden winding through the open door. It wasn't my house anymore, not officially, but tonight it felt that way. The high ceilings, the mahogany staircase, the way the late afternoon sun slanted through the dining room windows. It all held the ghost of my own life. I sat at the head of the long oak table, a place of honour my son Julian had insisted on. My daughter-in-law Clara was at his side, her laugh a sharp, bright sound that cut through the soft atmosphere. Her family, a cluster of stylish strangers, filled the other seats. I watched them, a faint smile on my lips, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Was this what it felt like to be a ghost at your own wake? Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. At the end, share the moral you take away. I'd love to hear it. My son Julian leaned over, his voice a low rumble. "Mum, you all right? You've been quiet." "Just taking it all in, Julian. It's a beautiful party." The lie tasted like dry wine on my tongue. The party wasn't a party. It was an anniversary dinner, and I was the lone guest from my side of the family. My grandson Leo was off at college, and my daughter Hannah lived a world away. It was just me, the matriarch, in a house I had built with my late husband, now playing a part in my son's new life. I felt a sudden coldness, the familiar prickle of unease that had been my companion for months now. It started the day Julian and Clara had bought the house from me, a transaction that had felt less like a purchase and more like a gentle eviction. I was old, they'd said. I needed to downsize, to not worry about a big house anymore. It was for my own good. I'd trusted them. And for a time, I believed them. A server in a crisp white jacket walked past, a platter of appetizers in his hands. He smiled at me, a brief professional flash of teeth. It was a company I knew well. I'd used them for every major event in this house for over 20 years. A small detail, but it was a comfort. I reached for a small crostini as he passed, but before I could take one, Clara's hand shot out and lightly touched his arm. "Oh, sorry," she said, her voice dripping with an exaggerated sweetness that made the hairs on my neck stand up. She gave me a small, knowing smirk. "These are for the family." The server looked confused for a moment, his gaze flicking between us. I just kept my hand out, my smile fixed in place. A few of Clara's relatives chuckled, low and conspiratorial. Julian just sat there, looking down at his plate. It was a microaggression, a small poke, a little reminder that I was no longer a part of the inner circle. It was a game they had been playing for a long time. My hand dropped to my lap. "Family," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to carry to every corner of the room. The murmurs died down. I met Clara's gaze, her smirk widening, a challenge in her eyes. It was a quiet choke point, a moment where the air thickened and everyone held their breath. I took a slow sip of water, the ice clinking loudly against the glass. "Yes, family," Clara said, her voice a little louder now for everyone to hear. The catering company was very specific. They only booked enough for family. You know Julian, me, and our loved ones. The laugh that followed was sharp, a high-pitched cackle from a cousin across the table. They all laughed, a chorus of polite, cruel mirth. Julian finally looked up, a shadow of shame on his face, but he said nothing. It was the moment I had been waiting for. I had known this day would come, a public declaration of my new place in their lives. The quiet, insidious cruelty they had shown behind closed doors, now out in the open. I just smiled. I didn't say a word. I simply looked around the room at the faces of my son's new family, at the elegant room that was once the heart of my home. And then I let my gaze rest on Julian's face. A face I had known since birth. A face that had once been so full of love for me. It was now a mask of quiet resignation. That's when I finally spoke, my voice calm, clear, and perfectly steady. Good thing I still own this house. The laughter stopped. Clara's smirk vanished. A profound silence fell over the room, as if the air had been sucked out. Their confused faces were a reward. They didn't understand. How could they? They had only ever seen the official documents, the paperwork that said my name was no longer on the deed. They hadn't seen the legal battles, the last-minute changes, the secret trust. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor, a loud, jarring sound that echoed in the silence. I stood up, my posture straight and tall. My gaze never left Clara's shocked face. "Excuse me," I said. A soft command. I pulled my phone from my clutch, the screen a bright beacon in the dim light. I walked out of the dining room and into the entryway, the silence trailing behind me. I could feel their eyes on my back, a dozen questions hanging in the air. I went to the large hall closet, the one with the hidden fire alarm panel my husband had installed decades ago, a small detail I was sure they had never noticed. My fingers traced the outline of the small concealed door in the wall. It was time to pack, but not my bags. It was time to pack the rain. The quiet gasp from the dining room was the sweetest sound I'd heard all year. I could feel their eyes, 100 tiny pinpricks on my back, as I walked away from the table. My phone felt heavy in my hand. Julian finally spoke, his voice a strained whisper. "Mum, what are you doing?" I didn't turn around. I just held the phone to my ear, the silence on the other end a little too long. I knew the number by heart. It had been in my contacts for a decade. The catering company, Cuisine Co. It was the same one my husband and I had used for every single event since we first moved in. The phone rang a second time. My heart was a steady drum in my chest. I could hear Julian getting up behind me. "Mrs. Eleanor," a cheerful voice finally answered. It was Liam, the manager. "Hello, Liam. It's Hannah," I said, using my maiden name. I hadn't used it in years. The house, this house, had always been my identity. But today, the name felt like a secret weapon. It was the name my husband had given me for the legal documents, the trust, the ownership, so that I could maintain some control over the property without my son or his wife knowing. Julian was standing just a few feet away from me now, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. He had a look he'd worn more and more often lately, one that said, "I can't believe you're doing this." "Mrs. Hannah, I didn't have you down for this evening. I thought your son Julian was handling everything with his wife." I glanced back at the dining room. Clara was now standing, her hands on her hips, her face a mask of furious disbelief. The rest of her family looked on, a mix of shock and amusement. "Yes, Liam, I am. I'm calling about the anniversary dinner at my house. I'm afraid something has come up. I need you to cancel the entire order, effective immediately." "Cancel?" Liam's voice was filled with a mix of surprise and confusion. "But the food is already on the premises. We have the full staff, the buffet is set up, everything is ready to go. The full payment was already processed." I leaned against the wall, a triumphant smile spreading across my face. I could feel the tension radiating from the dining room. "I'm sorry, Liam, I know. I'm calling a courtesy. You can keep the payment. I'm just letting you know the food won't be served." I hung up before he could respond. Julian stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar. "Mum, what did you just do?" I turned to him, my smile never wavering. "I just told them not to serve the food. I still own this house, Julian. The catering contract was signed under my name. I just terminated it." Clara stormed out of the dining room, her face red with rage. "What do you mean you terminated it? You sold us this house, old woman. What is this trick?" she shrieked. I looked at her, then back at my son. "I'm not trying to trick anyone, I'm just correcting a mistake." The next 30 minutes were a blur of chaos. First, the servers started packing up the food. The delicious aroma of the gourmet meal was replaced by the clatter of silverware and the rustle of bags. Clara's family watched in silence, their plates empty. Then, the wine was packed up, The glasses were taken, and the tablecloths were stripped. The room, once a picture of elegance, was now a hollow echo of itself. It was a beautiful symphony of dismantling. The more the servers packed, the more my heart lifted. It was a physical manifestation of the control I had lost, and now was regaining. Finally, the front door closed, and the last van drove away. The house was utterly silent, save for the hum of the fridge. The air smelled of nothing. A profound emptiness settled over the room. Everyone was just staring at their empty plates. It was exactly as the title had promised. Clara turned on Julian, her voice a low, furious hiss. "You told me she had no control over this house. You lied!" Julian looked at me, a deep sense of betrayal on his face. "Mum, why did you do this?" "You know why," I said. "You were just willing to ignore it, the way you've been ignoring me for years." And in that moment, as I stood in my silent, empty house, I knew the real storm was about to begin. The metaphorical rain was already here. But something felt very, very wrong. A feeling of quiet dread crept over me. The slap and the rain-packing scene. A strange phrase, a strange thought. It was a memory, a flash of something. I had a feeling that the slap was not a metaphor, and that the rain was not just rain. I looked down at my phone. A text message flashed on the screen. It was from Liam, the catering manager. "You sure you want to cancel, Mrs. Eleanor? The deposit is non-refundable. The rain is starting to get heavy here. I'm worried about the delivery truck." Rain? The sky outside was perfectly clear. I looked out the window to the garden and saw a dark shape moving toward the house, a figure carrying a large umbrella. It was my daughter, Hannah, but she wasn't due to arrive until next week. My heart dropped. Something was terribly wrong. My daughter was here, and the catering company mentioned rain, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the rain wasn't a metaphor. It was a real physical threat. The text message from Liam felt like a cold stone in my stomach. "The rain is starting to get heavy here. I'm worried about the delivery truck." I looked out the window. The sky was still a brilliant cloudless blue. No rain, not a single drop. But there, walking up the driveway, was my daughter, Hannah. She was wearing a large black raincoat, hood up, and carrying an equally large black umbrella, even though the sun was shining brightly on the manicured lawn. The image was absurd, like a scene from a dream, but the cold dread I felt was all too real. "Mom, what is she doing here?" Julian's voice was sharp with confusion as he saw Hannah. "She wasn't supposed to get in until next week." Clara, too, had come to the window, her furious scowl replaced by a look of profound unease. Is that Hannah?" she whispered, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. I didn't answer them. I just stared at my daughter, a woman I hadn't seen in over a year. She moved with a strange, deliberate slowness, each step a heavy weight on the stone path. The umbrella was held low, casting a shadow over her face. As she got closer, I could see that the fabric of her coat wasn't just dark, it was glistening, wet. Drops of water beaded on her shoulders and ran down the sides of the umbrella. It was as if she was carrying a private, invisible storm with her. She stopped at the front door, a simple wooden door I had seen 1,000 times, and knocked. 3 slow, methodical raps. I walked to the door, my heart pounding. I could hear Julian and Clara murmuring behind me, their voices low and panicked. "What's going on?" Clara hissed. "This isn't a part of your little game, is it?" I ignored them and opened the door. The fresh scent of petrichor, the earthy smell of rain on dry ground, hit me like a physical force. It wasn't my garden I was smelling, but something else entirely. Hannah lowered the umbrella and I saw her face. It was streaked with tears and rain, her eyes red and puffy. She looked at me, and her voice, a broken whisper, was what finally shattered my calm. "Mum," she said, her lip trembling. "I'm so sorry, I couldn't stop it." My mind raced. Stop what? The rain? The argument with Julian and Clara? What was she talking about? Then I saw the large, wet canvas bag she was carrying on her shoulder. It was dark green, the kind you would use to hold sports equipment. It was dripping. "Stop what, Hannah? What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She took a shaky breath. "He told me he wouldn't do it. He promised me. But he went through with it anyway. I had to get here. I had to bring it back before he could use it." A cold, awful feeling of dread washed over me. Julian and Clara were now right behind me, their presence a palpable heat at my back. "Bring what back, Hannah?" Julian demanded, his voice tight with suspicion. "What's in the bag?" Hannah's eyes met mine, a look of profound sorrow in them. She slowly reached into the bag and pulled out a small metallic object. It was a weather device, a prototype my late husband had been working on for years. He called it the Cloud Seeder. It was a little more than a box with blinking lights, but my husband believed it could manipulate weather patterns in a small localized area. He had spent his life savings on it. Julian, a successful tech entrepreneur, had always dismissed his father's work as a ridiculous fantasy. I looked at the device in Hannah's hand, then at Julian. My son had sold the house to me, yes, but he had used my money to start a new company. He had always been so focused on money, on success. But this was his father's legacy. "Julian, what did you do?" I whispered. Hannah looked at her brother, her eyes filled with a fresh wave of tears. "He was going to use it, Mom. He sold Dad's invention to a company in Nevada. They want to use it for drought control. He took Dad's life's work and sold it to the highest bidder." Julian's face went pale. He had a look of a man caught. "That's not what this is about, Mom. This is just a piece of old junk. It's a prototype. It's worthless." "It's not worthless, Julian," Hannah cried out. "It's Dad's work. It's his legacy." I looked at Julian, at his face, and I saw a man who had not just betrayed me, but his father as well. He had not just taken my house, but had tried to sell my husband's dream. My heart, which had been so full of triumph just moments before, now felt hollow. The empty plates on the dining table, the quiet house. It all meant nothing now. "Give me the device, Hannah," Julian said, his voice flat and menacing. He took a step toward her. Hannah pulled back, clutching the device to her chest. "No, Julian, I won't let you sell it." And then, with a speed I didn't know she possessed, Clara stepped forward. Her hand shot out, not to grab the device, but to strike Hannah across the face. The slap was loud and sharp, a cracking sound that echoed through the silent house. It was the slap that was promised in the title, and it was a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The slap wasn't for me, it was for my daughter, for a piece of our family, a piece of our history. Hannah stumbled back, her hand to her cheek. The device slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor, landing with a soft thud. The lights on the device began to blink, faster and faster, a frenetic rhythm that felt like a countdown. I looked down at the device, then up at Julian and Clara, their faces twisted with a fear I had never seen before. The air crackled with a strange energy. The metaphorical rain was gone. The real rain was about to start, but not just outside. It was coming from the device. And I had a terrible, chilling premonition. This rain wasn't going to be normal. It was going to be a storm that would change everything, and it was all my son's doing. The small metallic box on the floor pulsed with an urgent rhythmic light. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that tasted of ozone and a strange metallic tang. Clara's handprint was a vivid red mark on Hannah's cheek, and for a long moment, no one moved. Julian looked at the device, at the blinking lights, at the water dripping from Hannah's coat, and a primal animal fear contorted his face. "What is that?" he finally managed to say, his voice a terrified croak. "What did you bring into my house?" Hannah didn't answer. She just stood there, tears and rain streaking her face, her hand pressed against her cheek. I stepped forward, my body a shield between my children. "It's your father's legacy, Julian," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "The worthless invention you sold to the highest bidder." Julian flinched at the accusation. "It's just a prototype. It's not supposed to do this." He gestured wildly at the blinking device. "He never got a chance to finish it," I said, my gaze fixed on the box. "He spent the last years of his life pouring his soul into it, trying to figure out how to pack the rain and bring it to a place of drought, but he couldn't control it. He couldn't make it stop once it started." A low, distant rumble echoed through the house, a sound that came not from the sky, but from the ground itself. The lights in the chandelier flickered violently. Clara, her earlier rage now replaced by panic, screamed, "Turn it off! Do something!" Julian scrambled, but he didn't know how. He had only ever seen the numbers, the potential profit. He had never understood the passion, the genius, the obsession that had driven his father. The device was not just a machine, it was a part of my husband. And it was now in my son's hands, and he was completely helpless. Hannah, however, knew. She moved with purpose, knelt down, and reached for the device. But she wasn't fast enough. The blinking lights turned from a frantic red to a steady, solid blue. A high-pitched whine filled the air, so loud it hurt my ears. And then, with a pop and a hiss, the rain began. It didn't come from the sky. It came from the device itself, a fine, cold mist that began to fill the room, clinging to our clothes and hair. It was a deluge in a box, a private storm. But it was not normal rain. I saw it on the floor, on the wooden table, on the empty plates. It wasn't clear water. It was an oily, dark liquid, and it had a bitter, chemical smell. "What is that?" Clara shrieked, backing away, her heels skidding on the slick floor. "It's not just rain," I said, my voice a whisper. "It's a concentrated liquid. He was trying to figure out how to disperse it, to seed the clouds, but he never got it right. If you touch it, if it gets on your skin, he never figured out how to make it non-toxic." Julian looked at the oily liquid spreading across his polished hardwood floor, a look of abject terror on his face. The house he had so proudly bought, the house he had tried to claim as his own, was now being destroyed by his own greed. "I called the catering company," I said, the words coming in a rush. "Liam, he knows about the device. He was there when your father tested it once. It was a disaster. I called to warn them not to come back with the food because I was afraid of this. I was afraid it was going to rain again. But I didn't know you would bring it here, Hannah." Hannah was weeping openly now. "He said he wouldn't do it, Mum. He said he would just sell the house and he'd use the money for a new venture. He never told me he was going to sell Dad's device. I saw the papers. I saw he was going to sell it to some company in Nevada that wanted to use it to clean up a toxic spill. I had to get here. I had to stop him." My son looked at his sister and then at me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shame. He had been so consumed by his own ambition, by his need to prove himself, that he had been willing to sell his father's legacy, a dangerous, untested device, for money. The device on the floor continued to hiss, the oily rain spreading, leaving a dark, slick trail. It was on the chairs, on the elegant rug, on the table, and on the empty plates. The dinner had been cancelled, and in its place Julian had been served a different kind of meal, a dish of his own greed. Clara, now drenched in the dark liquid, looked at her husband with a newfound revulsion. "You did this? You brought this into our house?" Julian couldn't speak. He just stood there, paralysed by the sight of the chaos and destruction he had caused. He had packed the rain. He had brought the storm with him, and now he had to face the consequences. I looked at my son, at the man he had become, and my heart ached. I had been willing to play a game of emotional chess with him, to teach him a lesson about respect and family, but he had been playing a different game, a game with far higher stakes. He had gambled with his father's legacy, and he had lost. I took Hannah by the hand and led her out of the room, past the wreckage of the anniversary dinner, past Julian and Clara, who were now screaming at each other, their marriage dissolving in a pool of oily, dark rain. We walked out the front door, leaving the house to its slow, toxic destruction. The setting sun cast a golden light on the lawn, but the house, our home, was now a place of darkness and ruin. I knew then that the slap wasn't a punishment for me. It was a punishment for them. The slap and the rain-packing scene had come to pass, and it was a final, painful act of a family tearing itself apart. I hadn't needed to cancel the dinner. Julian had already cancelled everything himself.